to our first session with the bishops, recording here for amBaaSsador, and it's just a series, a podcast, if you will. Are we cool enough to say podcast? Are
I
we
mean,
cool?
is there video? Because podcasts typically are audio only.
Ooh, good
But
point, good
before we get into
point.
our first argument on the show, maybe we should introduce ourselves.
What? Why don't you start, kind sir? Or is this a ladies first? Is this a ladies first kind of
This is
situation?
absolutely a ladies first kind of thing.
I want to say hi to everyone. My name is Stacy Bishop. I am the founder, and what I like to say, chief ally here at amBaaSsador, a company that we hope you're going to hear a great deal more about, especially as I turn things over to my very, very handsome co-host here, Mr. Stephen Bishop. Steve,
Why,
would you like to
thank
introduce
you,
yourself?
Mrs.
You're
Bishop.
welcome.
I am Steve Bishop. I am the president of amBaaSsador, and amBaaSsador, we'll get into it, but we're very excited for it to help educate and help grow the knowledge of embedded finance and BaaS and really the future of community banking.
And that is why you're the president. What a great intro. So I'm sure that over the course of time, and we have plenty of interviews lined up, you and I will have disagreements. We will have different perspectives.
I
Hopefully
disagree with
not.
that because you're always right. So
Oh, oh, since when? You heard it here first, folks. You just heard it. But I hope we're going to be able to find common ground on the important things. And one thing that is very important to both of us is this concept of embedded banking and BaaS banking. It's something that, has been just such a big part of our world for the last 3 years or so. You being more in it, operationalizing embedded banking, speaking with community bankers about BaaS banking, and me, for the most part, coming in as a spouse and supporting role, learning right on alongside with you. And because of that, we have launched this endeavor, amBaaSsador, to really, as you mentioned, help community bankers understand what this world of BaaS is all about. And something that I think we both feel very passionate about is ensuring that people understand what BaaS is and making an educated, like just decision on whether BaaS is right for their institution or not. Anything to add out there? What do you see from your seat?
yeah, well, and it's not our first foray. I think both of us have had extensive experience with core providers, with Jack Henry specifically.
Right.
Um, I have worked at both big banks and little banks, community banks, and so you've always been like with the core, with the fintechs. So this space has always been close to our hearts, but like as it has evolved
Right.
and came about, we've been around it. And then spending the last 3, 4 years for me on how do you do it in a safe and compliant manner. Well, first of all, what the hell is it? Let's be honest. I
Right.
I
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was, but I just knew I needed to do it. I had this feeling, and what I found is the future of community banking, something that I'm very passionate about because it's a bank's opportunity to work with a fintech, have a partnership where they both win and just really shape the financial services industry.
So well said. So well said. That kind of brings me to the first question. And we'll probably have questions for each other because, as you mentioned, we're no strangers to the banking space. Either both of us have worked in banks, both of us have worked for a big core provider, big logo. Me more so from the fintech side, selling to people like you, community bankers and bankers as a whole. You in the interesting environment now selling to fintechs. So there's a lot that we're going to be able to discuss this conversation and future conversations with some of our guests. But I am very, very interested in hearing from you as a person that has walked this path before, from a really traditional community banking perspective. How difficult was the shift internally, or the selling process internally, or the education process internally, to get a traditional community bank thinking and then executing on an embedded strategy? What did you find?
It's very tricky in how you go about it. You can never have too much of the right education. Like, if you have misinformation, that's absolutely a bad education. There are limited resources on education, especially if you look at a traditional bank board, that's going to be not on the younger portion of humanity, typically. But we have a traditional, like, ingrained conservative nature. Just this, I don't want to take unnecessary risk. I've been very successful doing what I've done the same way for the past 20, 50, 100 years, whatever that is. So it's really a huge challenge to say, like, wow, that's really neat. That's different. We should do that. But first of all, we have to understand what it is. And so it's reiterating that message, understanding what it is, and realizing that we're not in the environment where you can just sit back and do things the way they always have, because there is a ton of change on the horizon. It's already happening. We see it all over the place. And now is the time that banks need to take action. I don't think that banks today that have not started down this path have the same luxury I had 3, 4 years ago when I was just learning. But the good news is that amBaaSsador is creating educational content. We're going to be there getting you up to speed much more quickly than I was able to. I've been down that path, and we can absolutely help you out. We're going to continue to add content. So even once you're in the BaaS space, or if you're already in the BaaS space, we're going to keep the latest, greatest. We're not going to be the negative Nellies just trying to get clickbaits. We're here to be your trusted allies. We'll let other people break the news. We'll explain the news and try to do it in a fair and like sensible manner.
Okay, I like that. We'll make sure we understand which of us is doing which part, because yeah, there's so much to BaaS, and there's so much that can be understood from BaaS. I bet, like me, you receive quite a few questions via LinkedIn or at events we go to, or even following up from events. Just people, especially community bankers, that they're interested. It's not that there's not, for many, a question or an interest. It's just, I don't know, is it demystifying BaaS? Is it just lack of confidence? I'm not certain what the right answer is, and maybe you know more from the conversations you've had, but I do find that there are definitely those individuals out there that haven't had the luxury of exploring even to understand what BaaS is. And then there's people that have heard the term but not exactly sure what it means or how it fits for their banks. Is that tracking with what you've seen? Do you find that there's a good number of bankers that they're good people, they're fantastic and intelligent and solid bankers, they just haven't been introduced to this concept of BaaS?
It's an interesting mix of financial institutions and banks specifically. I believe the numbers are somewhere around 3% of banks are in the embedded finance arena, and 7% have indicated an interest on some level. So that leaves 90% of banks that have not indicated an interest, and that's either because they don't know, which I believe is the vast majority, is they just don't know what it is, or they heard the term, but that's new. I'm going to wait and do that when my core provider has it for me, because I rely on my core for integration. But then the other portion of it is they've heard of the Evolve and Synapse scenario, which is just a crazy fiction. A fiction about that would never sell because it's just too far fantastical. But and then the voices of the space, they get, like, the negative voices get the clicks. They drive the mechanism, and so, like, if all you're hearing is negative news about a space and around consent orders and all these different things, and, like, of course you're going to be frightened by it and not want to get into it, but nothing could be further from the truth. You have to understand what it is and realize, like, what drove those consent orders, what's driving those negative articles, what's the real potential, what are we really doing here, And at the end of the day, all it is white label banking. We're taking our same traditional banking products, those ACH wires, your accounts, and you're embedding it in a fintech product. It's a new distribution channel, same products, white label banking. So at a very simplistic level, that's all it is. There's obviously a lot more to it, and you know, as long as you lead with compliance, you can absolutely set up a brand new revenue stream, a brand new division, and be very successful, all the while gaining a technology confidence that is going to be pivotal to your long-term success.
So true. I have to tell you something. So you were at this event yesterday and the day before speaking with some community bankers at a regional event. I had a conversation with one of our business partners in the middleware space, which could affect even those numbers you shared, because this provider had shared that they have now had their conversation with the very first credit union about embedded banking. And to this point, the numbers that I had seen had all been around banks.
Mm-hmm.
Banks that, 3% of banks are doing BaaS. There's 10% of banks that are interested in BaaS. And there's roughly 4,000-ish banks in the US.
Yeah.
When we open up the door to credit unions, we're tacking on an additional 5,000-ish FIs in the US that could potentially be getting into the banking as a service space. At least those credit unions that have open membership components. And not all credit unions do, let's be cognizant of that. But that was an eye-opening experience for me, and even necessitated more so that this mission of sharing and creating awareness around BaaS, beyond just the horrible situations that have occurred or the players in the space that have encountered the hiccups that they have, there's a lot of FIs now that are going to be paying attention, because there are so many more fintechs that are needing bank sponsors, those white labeled banking services. And truly, if banks aren't gonna do that, credit unions are willing to step in and also facilitate that. Not to make this a banks versus credit unions. This is an FI discussion, folks. This is financial institutions that want to be more competitive beyond just rate wars and trying to attract younger demographics. There's a new way inherently to compete out here. And it's, again, not banks versus credit unions. It's FIs today that are competing that want to change and open up a new business model and a new revenue stream. So I have grouped together quite a few ideas there in just that one little diatribe, my soapbox, if you will, Mr. Bishop. But I thought I would share that with you about the credit union, because
Yeah, it
it's
is.
something that our schedules were a bit off yesterday and I didn't get to discuss with you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've talked with several CUSOs and credit unions, like just about gauging what their interests or like what they
Yeah.
were thinking about it. And membership is absolutely the hardest thing to do and something they have to solve for. But it is, don't tell anyone, but credit unions and community banks are not that dissimilar at the
Right.
it's,
So true. It's so
um,
true.
and so let's when I say customers, credit union, please know I'm saying members, and bankers, if I say members, please know I mean customers. Just let's not get into that, and let's talk about the community. And this is you have your local community they're physically, and now you get to go to your new community, which is digital and nationwide. You're no longer trapped there. You have a much more opportunity, and you're partnering with these fintechs. And there are more and more fintechs every day, and they're looking for these partnerships. So you find use cases that you believe in, owners that you believe in, or founders, and then you partner together and create just a winning relationship.
Yeah. I want to take you back, if you will, just 2 or 3 years, because it was quite a bit of an internal sales cycle at the organization that you'd been at to just even consider BaaS. It's not something definitely that happened overnight. And I do think that there are institutions I've spoken to and people at those institutions that are immediately more receptive. They're super innovative and strategic and want to go down this path. But there are others that don't have that same internal culture. And I guess I'm just wondering for those FIs, banks and credit unions alike, that might be wanting to go down the BaaS route, but they don't even know where to begin. I would love to know from your experience, what do you think are the first concrete steps that an FI should take if they want to begin exploring BaaS and move in that direction?
Obviously, follow amBaaSsador, become an ally.
Absolutely.
I mean,
It's
that
a
is step
tricky
one.
spelling. It's a tricky spelling, folks. Double A, double S in the middle.
It's just amBaaSsador with an extra A. You just double down. So, I think it's important that whoever that change agent is in the bank, or if there's a change group that you're looking at it together, get the best understanding of BaaS that you can in the as quickly as you can. Set a time frame. Obviously you could always continue to learn more and then you never take action. So you have to have that trigger to take action. But gain a good understanding of BaaS and then start to socialize it. Once you understand what it is, start looking at where does this fit in our strategy. We recognize that banking today is going to change. We can no longer do it the same way. We need a niche market. That's most likely going to be BaaS or embedded finance. There are other niche markets you can play. There's not as many and there's not as much opportunity. So that's why I'm so excited and passionate about this particular space. So then figure out that strategy. And then you can start laying out the frameworks for who you partner with, how you go to market, how do you source those fintechs, all those other pieces. But start the conversation early. Do more than just yourself. I think that was, something that I would have changed going back. Is I had this vision. I saw it and I went after it, and I did not build enough awareness in the organization, and so there were pockets that weren't as committed. And that's the other thing you can't do. That you can't do this halfway. You have to be fully committed, 100%, no question mark, from the top to the bottom. And that's why it's so important to socialize and educate throughout the organization.
Yeah, I can see that completely. As far as internal structuring for any FI that's considering this and hearing your words about selling internally, selling broadly internally, what do you think about headcount? Do you need headcount specifically devoted to BaaS? And let's talk about when you're launching versus when you're 5, 6, 7 programs deep. To get going, can you get it going with current staff members?
I mean, there's no one size fits all answer. Let me tell you a story. No, I began my career doing core conversions, so converting from one core to another one. And the banks that had the most challenges were the ones that weren't staffed appropriately. So if you're asking bankers to add a 30% job to their already full-time job, that core conversion may not go well. And when I oversaw a core conversion, I went and brought people in specifically for it, and the core conversion went very well. Now, you'll have to look at your staffing to see, do they have capacity? I'm guessing you'll need to add 1 or 2 people to help really dig in and drive it. But it comes down to what the capacity is. As those programs come up, especially in compliance, you're going to want to have dedicated people to it very soon. Maybe not in the beginning, but how much compliance, lead with compliance, always that's, you want to make sure that is what you're preaching throughout the organization to your examiners, but really beef up both operational and compliance. It's not a huge lift, but you do have to have enough infrastructure there internally and your use case. So if you have a consumer high volume fintech use case, you're going to be much more labor intensive. You'll want to invest in tech, of course. Whereas if you have a
Mhm.
more like lower volume, that would probably be able to test the compliance much easier. Like that's not required. So that's why I said it's not one size fits all political. It's you're going to have to look at it and have a plan that accommodates like knowing not everyone can focus business only. You know, not everyone's going to focus on consumer only. Um, know that you're going to have a variance in there and have a plan to like that's part of just defining your strategy is how are you going to respond to the use cases, the fintechs that come in that you believe in that you decide to partner with.
Okay, that's much less of a political answer than it started. I appreciate the discussion and story time with Steve. We're gonna have to
Story
make
time
that a
is
thing.
we're going to make that is going to be a segment.
Story time with Steve. Love it. You mentioned something about leading with compliance, and you mentioned examiners. I know that there have been plenty of times where I would ask about what do you have in store for the day, and you would say, I'm meeting with examiners, I'm meeting with our regulators. That seems like you were doing it much more than a traditional banker would. I may be off base there, but in my experience growing up in and around the banking space, a lot of bankers they approach examiners and regulators when they have to. But it seems like most BaaS bankers take a different approach. They invite them in, they invite them in early, they discuss new fintech potential partners with them. At least that is what I've seen from you. Is that a recommendation that you would also make to a bank that's considering BaaS? Just start the discussions early. I feel like I'm setting you up there. I'm
You
giving you a
absolutely have to start.
softball.
No, you have to start the conversations early. As soon as you have that internal buy-in that this is something we're going to explore, which you absolutely the answer to that is yes, you should explore it. Then you need to mention to your examiners, like, whoever your primary examiner is, that you're looking at it and get their thoughts. They tend to be more open at this point this year than they were probably this point last year.
Oh,
Um,
yep.
but they, depending on which one, who you're talking to, they recognize that this is not going anywhere. That this is the future of banking, and there needs to be a way to deliver it. So they should be open to it. And part of the education that you're doing internally, you may have to do with your examiner at this phase because it's still few enough banks are doing it that there's still a lot of learning that everyone needs to do. But absolutely communicate with your examiners. I won't say that BaaS bankers love to have their examiners in. uh, we like to have good relationships with them. We don't want them to be surprised.
Okay.
They have the ability to come in and shut you down, which you don't want, and they no one likes to be surprised. So say have that communication. We're looking at this. Do you have any concerns or questions? Like what would make you help you become comfortable with it? And that's what I'm going to focus on because we want to be compliant. We want to make sure you're happy when you come in. And you have that like any time with any relationship, you have that communication. And examiners are no different. Yes, they can carry a big stick, but you can avoid like any punitive action by working with them. I mean, they can be a partner as well and
Mm-hmm.
view it in that way that you're not trying to hide anything or because you want to be compliant and it makes just a better like when they come review, yes, they will probably find something because that's their job, but it's not going to be big because you're following amBaaSsador and you have the proper procedures and policies and you have a good program that will evolve over time and continue to mature in that compliant manner.
That's so true. And I should mention here, we are passionate here at amBaaSsador, and we are also more than just the bishops. While we're in this space and living this and preaching this each day, we're also a strong network of partners and thought leaders and experts in the space that you're going to continue to hear from and read material from. So there's just a great deal of information that's going to be shared and other groups that we can also point you to. So to that point, Steve, yeah, I'm not looking for names here necessarily of partners. That's not our role. Our role is to educate you on the potential of embedded banking and help you make a decision, whatever that is, an educated decision about BaaS. But we do have providers that are interested in sharing their thoughts, sharing pitfalls to avoid, not just pitch you on a product, but share their thought leadership because these are experts in their relative fields. And you mentioned earlier the importance of investing in technology. Are there some big categories of technology that you think bankers and credit union employees absolutely must evaluate with the BaaS decision? I'm thinking big picture categories like, do they need a middleware or subledger provider? Do they need
Yeah,
compliance and RegTech? Tell me your thoughts there.
you know, when I first started down the path, it was do you do you build? There wasn't even really a buy, but I mean, I could there's build, buy, or partner, right? The
Right.
buy would have been having a tech company build something for me and pay them to do that custom job. I couldn't build it because I didn't have the development staff. I wanted to do the buy partner with the custom group, but partner is really where it's at. If you're a banker, you can focus on your banking. What makes you a bank is you have a charter. How do you keep that charter? You stay compliant. So focus on being a banker, focus on compliance, and find the right partner. And you have to have APIs. You're probably not going to have the staff internally to develop it. So you have a partner that can has that API. It will be grouped with your core, your vendor, and then the fintech can come consume that API, deliver your white label banking in their app with or their product they, through those APIs. So you have middleware, then you absolutely will have to have that. There's going to be outside counsel because of the regulatory and around it. You'll want to make sure you have a specialist in that. You can use in-house, but it's not the like. I would also have outside just for some nuances if it gets something crazy pops up. There's probably the hottest area I've seen in fintech growth for within banks and financial institutions is RegTech. It seems like every day I hear of another one, but they're nuanced too. There's a lot that RegTechs can do, and I was in a conversation earlier today, and we were talking about probably the biggest hurdle to get an executive like a chairman or CEO of a bank say yes, we're with BaaS, is for them to have assurance that they still have control over that customer, the same level of control that they would have if a customer is in their branch. And you can do that by having like your tech that's looking at that customer interaction. That if there's complaints, you're not getting it weeks, months down the road. You can have like an LLM AI that's consuming all that data and identifying any highlights. So this customer, the fintech thinks it's their customer. The regulators think it's the bank's customer, so therefore the bank thinks it's their customer. But it's a partnership where it's both of your customers. The bank is ultimately responsible and has to maintain all the customer compliance and those details around it. And that's absolutely something you can do through RegTech. You did not ask me to go on a diatribe about RegTech, but that is a big bucket with lots of different providers.
It is.
And then there's also you're not going to have all the skills in house. So there are consultants, people that specialize in if you're like really nuanced areas. I always focus on what you know and get good resources for the things that you're not great at.
Okay, I'm going to remind you of this when it comes to some of the home projects that you're insistent on doing yourself, folks.
You cut out
Stay
there. I think I was driving through a tunnel, so
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for the reminder coming your way about this. One piece I didn't hear you mention as well that I know you and I have chatted quite a bit about data. Information is becoming paramount in all spaces and in around banking, especially when it comes to banking as a service, embedded banking, because there's just that ownership of the customer scenario and just all of the different data sources that can be pulled together individually from fintechs. It's also there's that macro view that I know some of the data providers that we have relationships with and speak with have crystallized some things about what they're doing in some of the larger BaaS programs. So I would agree those are the big categories that you mentioned. And that again is our job to ensure that if you're overwhelmed when you're looking through BaaS, You understand the role that each of these categories would play in your own BaaS program. It's not our job, as we mentioned, to tell you which provider to go with. It's to tell you the why behind the categories and then let you make your informed decisions from there. But that's what we and our partners are here for. Steve, I am wondering, because you have been through this, is there a misconception about BaaS as a whole that you would like to clear up? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception comes from the headlines. The
Okay.
consent, the past few years, there have been several consent orders. Like it seemed like every week there'd be a new consent order. Consent orders are really bad for the institution that received them, but they're really good for all of us that didn't, because it gives us a framework to learn from it, to not do make the same mistakes. So the misconception, I think, is probably, for those that know about BaaS, the biggest misconception is going to be that it's hard to do it in a compliant manner. If you actually dig into those consent orders, it's really not that they were doing nefarious activity for the most part. It's really that they just didn't have process or procedures, and they weren't capturing the artifacts, or they're missing a step, and that's where that's why it's a guide for you that you can learn. Make sure you have this as part of your program, and that's how you
Hmm.
stay compliant. That's how you be successful. So don't be frightened by the consent orders. Don't be frightened by negative headlines. Take just a pragmatic view of it and really try to understand what it is, the potential of it. You can add a new revenue stream while you build technology and the competency in it, and it's just a really wonderful place to be, to set yourself up for the future, to remain relevant, a viable institution.
I want to add to that, and then do I have permission to answer this from my own side as well? Because I'm going to take
Absolutely.
it. I'm going to do it whether you say I have it or not. I had a conversation with someone that we're going to be interviewing coming up here about even this whole topic of consent orders. It's a reg tech provider plugging in those consent orders to their institution, to their software, and they use AI to help and evaluate a BaaS bank's policies to determine that against the consent orders, any risks or any challenges, things that need to be noted, which I found fascinating. So more to come on that particular topic in the future. That's one thing I wanted to mention based upon what Steve had shared. A couple of things, and I realize, again, I didn't ask myself this question, but because I have a different opinion than you, I want to share two things that I think bankers evaluating BaaS may also just be a little misinformed of is, first of all, that you have to be a big bank or a bank over asset size X to be in BaaS. And that is simply not the case. I met a fantastic institution at FinTech Meetup that started BaaS at 200 million in asset size. And they focused on a lending related program. That's been their focus, and that's how they've continued to grow. Their bank has grown exponentially since that point in time. But if you're sitting there listening to this or thinking BaaS won't work for you because we're too small, I would challenge you to say, why don't you just dig a bit deeper and really learn a little bit more? Because there's more banks that have done it starting from a small size than you might expect. And there's quite a few technology providers that Steve and I have spoken to that focus on the smaller community size banks. So the price point is meant to be more palatable and more success oriented. So that is one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing, Steve, happens to be related to costs. And let's be honest, in most cases, for most FIs, there is a capital outlay of costs that you'll make for some of the technology and the providers that we discussed previously. I guess what I have in my mind is that some FIs are used to seeing returns quickly with a lending portfolio or with other areas of their bank. But I've heard time and time and time again, from BaaS bankers that I've interviewed and spoken with thus far that you have to play the long game when it comes to banking as a service and returns on investment. Have you found that as well in speaking with other community bankers, that there is this concern about a capital outlay versus time to return on that?
Yeah,
Or
it doesn't require the same capital support that traditional lending does, or even deposits for that matter. If you're looking at your balance sheet,
right.
it does require cash outlay for staff, for tech, but that payback, it comes down to the programs that you sign, how aggressive you are. I've talked to some banks that are going to take it extremely slow, and I don't think that's the best tactic, because you need to have the infrastructure in place to have a compliant program, and that's going to need the capital. But to make that ROI get back, and it can be done, very quickly, much more quickly than if you build a new branch. Those that requires capital, and it takes years to recover it. So you can do it. It's way better than a branch for a variety of reasons, but it does have an ROI. But focus on the long game, like you said, and to back up what you said about size. I was speaking with a bank that was 200 million in assets yesterday. I've talked to one that was 50 million in assets that had a huge BaaS program.
Wow.
And I mean, it's so the size is not asset size is not indicative of whether you can do BaaS. The answer is yes, you can do BaaS, and you can, it doesn't have to be a huge outlay of capital, but focus on the long term, focus on gaining those competencies, and focus on creating that new revenue stream. And that's the beauty of it. If you're taking it to the board, if you're a change agent, this is a big win for you. If no one else in the bank is looking at it, start educating them, because very rarely do you have the opportunity to say, we need to invest in something to learn and to gain this competency. That, oh, by the way, it also has a revenue stream. We can make money while we get better. That's just not really heard of that often. So it's a win-win. I've had chairman of the board say to me, that sounds too good to be true. I understand that it does sound that way, but it absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. It's a wonderful thing that I think all banks should be looking at and getting involved in.
Yeah. And for any bank that's out there wanting to not get involved or build a program until you have a fintech, that might be a little too late, I suspect. Trust me, there are more fintechs looking for sponsor banks than the other way around. That has been my definite experience since we have launched amBaaSsador, and speaking with so many community bankers, so many providers and fintechs out in the space. Mr. Bishop, this will be the first of many, many, many conversations you and I have directly and with the people that we have on our roster that we'll be interviewing over the coming months and potentially years. But tell me, kind sir, what is next for amBaaSsador? What are we working on? You and I both, we have our real jobs, but we're passionate about this. We work on amBaaSsador all the time. What are we doing? What should we share with people?
This is episode 1. We're going to continue to have these podcasts or video casts. I don't know what it is. So newsletter, webinars. We're going to have webinars. LinkedIn. Follow amBaaSsador. Follow amBaaSsador especially. Stacy and I both have our separate pages with great content that can probably relate to you as well. We're going boots on the ground. Not all bankers will be on the digital environment, and they need to know about it. So we're going to several conferences, and not just the fintech conferences where the banks already doing it are, but we're going to regional user group conferences and talking to them. So we're going to be busy, but it's absolutely something that we're passionate about, something we enjoy doing, and we can't wait to see what amBaaSsador becomes and all the allies that come and join us in this endeavor.
I love this. If you have specific questions for your own bank, please reach out to Steve or myself. We do have these conversations all the time. If we can't answer something for you, we know the people to answer this for you. The players in this space, the thought leaders, the other bankers as well. If you want a variety of individuals to speak to, reach out. We are here to help. We are here to ensure that you do know everything you possibly need to about banking as a service, BaaS, embedded banking, embedded finance, whatever you want to call it. It's our job and our mission to make you feel confident when you decide whether BaaS is right for your organization or not. With that, Steve, I think we can wish these kind folks a wonderful day and looking forward to the next conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.